session. All in time. So I see them. Okay, late.
This session will last about 45 minutes. We are hoping to get this done by 9 o'clock. Okay, take it away.
Okay, well, having talked about task-based language teaching, the main purpose of which is to try to really develop students' communicative language skills and confidence in communicating, I want to turn now to grammar. But I'm interested in a particular way of teaching grammar, and this particular way of teaching grammar is what I call consciousness raising, or using consciousness raising tasks. And I'm going to get you to do one of these tasks also, all right? So that you have staying power. You stay with me. Okay. I want to start off by talking a little bit about two types of language knowledge that people have. And that is explicit knowledge and implicit knowledge. So explicit knowledge is knowledge about language, knowledge about grammar, rather than knowledge of language. It's factual knowledge. And this is what really a lot of high school students develop. They develop factual knowledge about grammar. They know the rules for third person singular, for subject-verb agreement. They know the rules for using prepositions, etc. They develop explicit knowledge. And we know that some language learners rely primarily on explicit knowledge because, in fact, they acquire very little of the other type of knowledge, which is implicit knowledge. And I would say that I think it's changing in Japan, but I think for a long time, students leave school with explicit knowledge and very, very little implicit knowledge. So this is what implicit knowledge is. It's knowledge of language that enables you to communicate easily without having to think about how to say something, right? So you don't have to think about what you have to say, you can almost automatically say it. And implicit knowledge and implicit language learning plays a major role in our lives, right? Plays a major roles in our lives. And I list here 3 activities which really involve implicit knowledge. Riding a bicycle, right? You know how to ride a bicycle, you don't have to think, you can just do it automatically, right? And if you think about how you learned to ride a bicycle, did you learn it in a task-based way, or did you learn it in a more sort of structured, didactic type way? How do you think you learned to ride a bicycle? Do you think you learned it in a more task-like way, or do you think you learned it by doing it? By doing it, right? So you learned it in a task-based way, because that's what I mean by doing it. You didn't have your mum or your father say, okay, to learn to ride a bicycle, you have to get on, sit on the saddle, right? Lift your leg up, put it on the pedal, put the other foot on the other pedal, right? Press with one leg, the pedal will go around. You don't have detailed instruction, you're smiling, right? You learn to ride a bicycle in a task-like way. You develop implicit knowledge about how to ride a bicycle. Tying a shoelace. Have you ever tried to tell someone how to tie a shoelace? Just imagine trying to give instructions about how to tie a shoelace. And you certainly didn't learn to tie a shoelace by your mum giving you instructions. Yeah, take one end, take the other end, cross them, right? You didn't. You learned again by doing. The point I'm trying to make is that so much of what we do in life is implicit knowledge. And if we go back to my first talk was about task-based language teaching, and task-based language teaching is about trying to develop people's implicit knowledge. Learning by doing, right? Not by studying, but learning by doing. But now, I'm going to talk about explicit knowledge. Both types of knowledge are important, right? And to my mind, any language program must be balanced and must help students to develop explicit knowledge of grammar points, but must also help them to develop the kind of implicit knowledge that they need for actual communication. Both, right? But I'm going to talk about explicit knowledge. And I'm going to start by getting you to do a task, the purpose of which is to get you to try to work out a grammar rule for yourself. So I've chosen this particular grammar rule because I don't think you know it. I know you've studied a lot of grammar. I know you know a lot of explicit grammar. I don't think you know this one, so I'm going to see, right? It's about verbs with two objects. And there are some verbs in English that allow two different patterns with the verb. So an example of that is the verb give, where you can say she gave a book to her father, or you can say she gave her father a book. And they're both correct, okay? They're both correct. But there are other verbs in English that only allow one of these patterns, and where the other pattern is wrong. So the policeman explained the law to Mary is grammatical, but the policeman explained Mary the law is not grammatical. It's ungrammatical. It's an error. In fact, it's a very common error that language learners make, including Japanese language learners. So what I want to try to do is to get you to work out whether a verb is like give and allows both patterns, or whether a verb is like explain and only allows one pattern. So let me ask first of all, does anyone know the difference between verbs like give and explain, and why give has two patterns and explain only has one? Have you studied this before? Put your hand up if you think you know. He knows. He's very clever. All right, the rest of you don't know. All right. So what I'm going to get you to do first of all is to look at these sentences and to write down whether you think the sentences are grammatical or ungrammatical. To save time, I'm going to read out each sentence, and I'm going to ask you to say whether you think it is grammatical or ungrammatical. So the first sentence, they saved Mark a seat, right? Hands up if people think this is grammatical. Come on, hands up if you think it's grammatical. Hands up if you think it's not grammatical. Hands up if you're not sure. Oh, okay. All right. It's grammatical. Make a note, it's grammatical. Kim's father read him a story. Put your hand up if you think this is grammatical. Hands up for grammatical. Ungrammatical? Not sure? It is grammatical. Okay? She donated the hospital some money. Put your hand up if you think this is grammatical. Ungrammatical. Not sure. It is ungrammatical. It is not grammatical. They suggested Mary a trip on the river. Put your hands up if you think this is grammatical. Ungrammatical. You are right, it is ungrammatical. They reported the police the accident. Who thinks it's grammatical? Ungrammatical. You are right, it is ungrammatical. Okay? They threw Mary a party. Put your hand up if you think this is grammatical. Ungrammatical. It is grammatical. It is grammatical. It's correct. Okay? The bank lent Mr. Thatcher some money. Grammatical? Hands up. Ungrammatical? It is grammatical. It is grammatical. He indicated Mary the right turning. Put your hands up if you think it's grammatical. Ungrammatical? It is ungrammatical, not grammatical. The festival generated the college a lot of money. Grammatical? Hands up. Ungrammatical? This is a bit difficult, but for now I'm going to say ungrammatical. All right? I'm going to say ungrammatical for the moment. Okay? And the last sentence I put in, especially for Japanese audiences, he cooked his girlfriend a cake. All right? Who thinks this is grammatical? Ungrammatical. It is grammatical. It may be inappropriate, but it is grammatical. Okay? It's grammatical. He cooked his girlfriend a cake. All right? So you needed to really make a note of that. So what I want you to do next is this, right? I want you to list the verbs that in the sentences that you've just looked at that are like give and only take one pattern, and the other verbs that are like explain that only allow, the verbs that are like give that permit both sentence patterns, and those that are like explain that only allow one sentence pattern. Okay? So this is really quite easy if we go back, because all the sentences that were ungrammatical are verbs like explain, right? And only allow one pattern. And all the verbs that were grammatical, all the sentences that were grammatical, have verbs like give, right? That allow both patterns. So I would like you to just make a list of the two verbs. You need to actually write this list down. Right? So, the grammatical sentences are, number 1, save, number 2, read, number 6, through, number 7, lent, and number 10, cooked. So those are the verbs that take both patterns. And then you've got the other verbs, donate, suggest, report, indicate, generate, that only take one pattern. They're like explain. So write the verbs down in 2 lists. I'm sorry? Sorry, I can't hear.
Can you repeat which verbs belong to which category?
Yeah. The verbs that were, the sentences that were grammatical, right, the verbs are like the verb give. The sentences that were ungrammatical are like the verb explain. So you should have 2 lists of verbs. So the first list should have save, read, lent, cook, through. And the second list should have donate, suggest, report, indicate, and generate. Right? You've got 2 lists. Now, talk to the person next to you and come up with an explanation for which verbs. How can you tell whether a verb is a verb like give and has both patterns, or a verb is like explain and only has one pattern? Look at the 2 lists of verbs, look at them, and work out the rule for yourself. What's the difference between the verbs in the 2 lists? Okay, does anyone feel ready to tell me the difference between the two sets of verbs, the two lists of verbs? Anyone wants to come up with the rule? How do you know whether a verb can have both patterns or a verb can only have one pattern? Who can come up with a rule? Nobody? Okay, all right. Would you like to go across and
Very basically, one list consists of verbs of a single syllable, and the other list is two syllables.
And that's it?
What's the rule?
Oh, that's it. That's it. Okay? The verbs of one syllable allow both patterns. Look at them. They all have one syllable. And the verbs that have two syllables only allow one pattern. Isn't that a strange rule? Right? Of course, there is a sort of deeper explanation for that. Because all the verbs with one syllable come from Anglo-Saxon. You know Anglo-Saxon? The original English language? Yeah? And all the verbs with two syllables come from Latin. But not directly from Latin. From French. Right? Because those nasty French people, right, in 1066 came across from Normandy, from France, and invaded England, and French became the official language and the language of the court and the nobility for about 2 centuries, right? But gradually English took over again. But by the time English took over again, a lot of French words had got into English, right? And if you look at how these words work in French, expliquer, indiquer, right? You'll find that they don't have two patterns, they only have one pattern, in effect. So that's the reason why, right? But it is not as simple as that. And I'm going to ask you now to do another task so that you can see that in fact it's not as simple as that. So, more on verbs with two objects, right? It says, can you explain the difference between explain and purchase? Some multi-syllable verbs only allow one pattern when there is a direct and indirect object, such as explain. This is what we've already discovered. The teacher explained the grammar point to the class. The teacher explained the class the grammar point is ungrammatical, okay? But there are some multi-syllable verbs that do allow two patterns. So the rule that you have so far learned, one syllable, two patterns, two syllables, only one pattern, is not quite right. Because there are some two-syllable verbs that do actually allow both patterns, right? And here is an example. Mr. Smith purchased a new car for his son, right? It's grammatical. Mr. Smith purchased his son a new car is grammatical, right? But purchase has two syllables. So technically, according to the rule that you have so far worked out, this shouldn't be possible. But it is possible. So, more on verbs with two objects. Say whether the following sentences are grammatical or ungrammatical, right? So let's see if you can work this one out now, and whether you can work out which two-syllable verbs do allow both patterns, and which two-syllable verbs do not. The principal guaranteed his staff a salary rise. Hands up if you think it's grammatical. Hands up if you're not sure. Hands up if you're totally lost now and want to go home. The principle guaranteed is standard salary rise is grammatical, right? My friend recounted me an amusing story. Put your hand up if you think it's grammatical. Ungrammatical. Yeah, I'm going to say ungrammatical, right? At best, we would not want to say that. The teacher reported the headmaster the result of the examination. Put your hands up if you think it's grammatical. Ungrammatical. Yes, good, ungrammatical. The reporter exposed his readers the lie. Put your hands up if you think that it is grammatical. Ungrammatical. Yes, ungrammatical. The courier delivered Mary the parcel. Told you, it's so difficult. Who thinks this one's grammatical? Ungrammatical. I think it's grammatical. I think most of the native speakers would probably accept this, okay? Partly because they're acting in accordance with a very implicit rule which you haven't worked out yet, right? But you will, you'll get there. The doctor prescribed his patient a new medicine. Put your hands up if you think it's grammatical. Ungrammatical. I would say grammatical, okay? The committee awarded John the prize. Put your hands up if you think it's grammatical. Ungrammatical? It is grammatical. The philosopher suggested his class the solution to the problem. Who thinks it's grammatical? Ungrammatical. It is ungrammatical. And the prisoner demanded his cellmate medical attention. Who thinks it's grammatical? Ungrammatical. It is ungrammatical. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So let's just go through this. And again, we've got to make out two lists of verbs, right? Those where it is grammatical and those where it's ungrammatical, right? So in the grammatical one, both patterns are possible. In the ungrammatical one, only one pattern is possible. So the principle guaranteed is salary rise. Guaranteed, grammatical. My friend recounted me an amusing story, ungrammatical. So you're going to make two lists of verbs. So guarantee is in one list, and recount is in the other list. The teacher reported the headmaster the result of the examination, ungrammatical. The reporter exposed his readers the lie, ungrammatical. The courier delivered Mary the parcel, grammatical. The doctor prescribed his patient a new medicine, grammatical. The committee awarded John the prize, grammatical. The principal allocated Mary a new role, grammatical. The philosopher suggested his class the solution to the problem, ungrammatical. And the prisoner demanded his cellmate medical attention, ungrammatical. So you've got your two lists of verbs. Have you made them? You've got the two lists? Right? Look at them. Now clearly the difference is not number of syllables. So this doesn't work now. So what is the explanation for why some verbs do allow, some multisyllable verbs do allow both patterns, other multisyllable verbs do not? And when someone is ready to give me the rule and give me the explanation, please put your hand up, because of time. Look at the two lists of verbs. Again? All right, I don't mind. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll put myself out on a limb and say the grammatical ones have a meaning component that we could say is something like cause to have. Right? The ones on the left mean when if you guarantee a salary raise, you cause people to have such a thing. And the ones on the grammatical list don't have that meaning.
That's it. That's it. That's it. Or to put it more simply, But that's a good way, no, that's a good way of putting it. I was impressed, A plus, all right, I was impressed, yeah. To put it simply, if the meaning of the verb has the idea of giving something, of someone getting and receiving something, right, then both patterns are possible. If, on the other hand, it has more of the sense of telling, saying, right, then only one pattern is possible. So now we've arrived at what is really quite a complex rule, which you've discovered for yourself, right? So the rule goes something like this. By and large, one-syllable verbs allow both patterns. In general, one-syllable verbs allow both patterns. However, when we come to multi-syllable verbs, it's more difficult, because some of them allow two patterns, some of them only allow one pattern, right? So why is that? And the answer is to do with the meaning of the verb. That if the meaning has the idea of giving and receiving, then both patterns are possible. If, on the other hand, it has more the meaning of telling, informing, then only one pattern is possible. And that's the rule, right? So what I'm really trying to show you is that you can guide learners to work out their own rules. I didn't tell these people the rules. Did you know the rule before?
No.
Did you know it before?
I had it maybe.
But most people don't know this rule, right? Because it's a strange, complicated rule, right? But you can work out rules for yourselves. And what I want to try to suggest is that instead of teachers standing up and telling students the rule, that we can engage them in intellectual activity, thinking, and help them to work out the rule for themselves. And I want to argue that this is a much more interesting way of teaching grammar than the traditional way of teaching grammar, where the teacher gives a direct explanation, right? That's my essential argument. You can design these kinds of tasks to cover a great variety of different grammar points. And I don't have time today to show you all the tasks. But this particular one here is designed to get students to discover the rule for prepositions of time. This is probably a rule that you do know, right? So they're given a text, and they're asked to underline the prepositions. So they go and they underline the prepositions in this text. And then when they've underlined the prepositions, what they do is to write the time expression in the table. So they look at all the time expressions in the text, and they write all the ones with at, all the ones with in, all the ones with on. And then you ask them to make up a rule. We use at with, we use in with, we use on with. So the idea is that we can help the students to kind of work it out for themselves, so we don't have to tell them. Okay? Here is one which I've actually designed this afternoon, right? And it's on an area of grammar. You don't have to use this technical term with your students, but it's on an area of grammar called epistemic modality. And there's the definition. Epistemic modality refers to the way speakers communicate their doubts, certainties, and guesses, their modes of knowing. And in English, there are different ways we can express these modes of knowing, our doubts, our certainties, and guesses. We can either use adverbials, such as certainly, probably, possibly, or we can use modal verbs, such as must, should, could, may, might, etc. Okay? So one of the things that learners have a lot of difficulty is actually working out the meanings of these modal verbs. What is the exact meaning of must as an epistemic modal verb? Should, could, may, and might. So I thought I'd try and design a task that we could perhaps use with students to get them to see the meanings of these. So here is the first little task that I designed, which is how certain are you? It says someone left a bag on the train, and inside there was a purse with a lot of money, a stethoscope, a syringe. Sorry, it shouldn't be a purse. Yeah, sorry. Someone left a bag on the train, and inside there was a purse with a lot of money, a stethoscope, a syringe, and a lot of medicine bottles. Okay? Here are some sentences about the owner of the bag, and they express different degrees of probability. Different degrees of probability. And it says, put the sentences in order from the most probable to the most likely. Now again, we don't have time to do this, and I see a few people now looking at their cell phones, so we better hurry up. All right? Which of these sentences expresses the greatest certainty, the most probable, the most likely? So it should be put the sentences in order from the most probable to the least likely. So which of these sentences expresses the highest level of certainty? Which sentence? Sentence number? Sentence number? Sentence number 2, right? The owner of the bag is a doctor. If you say that, you're certain, right? Which one expresses, in your opinion, the least certainty? This is perhaps a little bit more of a matter of opinion, but maybe I would probably choose 5. The owner of the bag may be a drug addict. Yeah? Right? And the others come somewhere in between. Right? The others come somewhere in between. So, for example, the owner of the bag should be a man. Yeah? Is towards being certain. Yeah? The owner must be worried about losing the bag is even more towards certain. So it's possible to rank these sentences in terms of the most certain and the least certain. And by doing that, you make the students think about the meaning of these modal verbs. Okay? And that's the order that I suggest that they come up with. Right? Then I would go on to say, match the sentences in A with those in B. So we've got the same sentences in A, but in B, I've now introduced adverbials, like possibly, probably, etc. And you have to try to match the sentence in A, which has a modal verb, with the sentence in B, which has an adverbial. Okay? So what I'm trying to do here is to help the students to work out for themselves, to discover for themselves the meanings of these modal verbs and how they match on to different adverbials, etc. All right? And I would argue that if you do this task, you can once again guide students to try to discover how these epistemic modal verbs work, what their meanings are, etc., and what the equivalent adverbials are in English. Okay? You can also do it with not looking at grammar this time, but looking at what is called pragmatics, the appropriate use of language. And you can design these consciousness-raising tasks to make students think about what constitutes an appropriate way to perform a particular speech act, right? And this is on making a request, and the idea is that the students look at these sentences and they have to decide whether they feel that these sentences are appropriate for this particular task here. The student is sending an email to his professor, teacher, to ask for some feedback on an assignment that the student has given. So the student has given an assignment to the professor and is now sending an email to ask for some feedback, right? And they have to decide which of these constitutes an appropriate way to actually ask for feedback, and why it's appropriate, and also why it's not appropriate. So here is another consciousness-raising task, the purpose of which this time is to try to get people to think about the appropriate way of making a request, okay? This is a longer task designed again to make people think about the appropriate use of language rather than the grammatical use of language. And this was actually based on an email that I received from an Iranian student, right? I get a lot of emails from different people around the world, particularly from Iran, right? And some of these requests are very strange, yeah? So here is you can have a look at this. This is the request, the email that I received. Dear Professor, I am Reza, a PhD candidate in teaching English as a foreign language at University of Tabriz. I'm conducting a study about the apology strategies of Persian speakers for my sociolinguistics course, and my professor insists that I use certain sources for my article. The most important source that my professor wants is his book chapter entitled House Julianne, oh excuse me please, apologizing in a foreign language. In English, Als Sprachsprache by B. Kettleman et al. I have searched every place for this source. I've even traveled to other cities and visited the libraries of their universities, but I could not find it. If I cannot find this source, I may not be able to pass my course. Dear Professor, your kind help is the only hope that I have. Would it be possible for you to help me and send me the book chapter? All right? Dear Professor, I really appreciate your kind help. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Okay? This is totally inappropriate, right? And you're smiling, yeah? But what makes it inappropriate? And this particular task asks people to actually rewrite the email message to make it an appropriate request. So this is a much more advanced sort of consciousness-raising task, right? To make people think very hard about what they need to do in order to make this an appropriate request in English. So what I've done is given you quite a few examples of consciousness-raising tasks. So I would just like to conclude with what I see the advantages of teaching grammar through these tasks. First of all, as you can see, they involve the learners in actively discovering and building their own explicit grammar. I think if students try to work out rules for themselves, they're more likely to remember them, right? Discovering things for yourself is always a better way than having people tell you. Research has shown that it can work as well as teachers doing direct explanation of grammar, right? There's been a study by Photos which shows that this way of discovering grammar is just as good in helping learners to develop and remember rules as teachers directly telling them. They lend themselves to group work, so learners have a chance to interact with each other. In a way, they are a kind of communicative task, even though their content is grammar. If students work in groups to try to work out the rule, and if they're talking in English while they're trying to work out the rule, they're communicating. And grammar simply becomes a topic to communicate with. They're a kind of an opinion gap task. And they serve as a kind of learner training function by helping learners to develop the skills needed to discover grammar rules autonomously. We know that good language learners are interested in grammar, think about grammar, try to work things out for themselves. If you get them to do these consciousness-raising tasks, you're developing the skills they need in order to try to work things out for themselves. So it seems to me that this is an interesting, theoretically sound way of actually trying to develop learners' explicit knowledge of grammar. So my two talks have looked at the two sides of teaching. One side of teaching needs to focus on developing learners' communicative skills through communicative tasks. The other side of teaching needs to build up learners' explicit knowledge of grammar, their explicit knowledge of what is appropriate, so that they can also use that when they are writing and when they're communicating. Well, I think perhaps I should stop there. It's past 9, but we do have time for maybe a couple of last questions.
Thank you, Professor. We take a couple of questions now. Do you have any comments on that? Maybe somebody who hasn't spoken up today in the section. Do you have any? If not, then I will get back to you guys. Anybody having a burning question? Okay, I'll get back to you.
Would you be so kind as to recount how you replied to the Iranian student? Did he get his paper?
I'm afraid I deleted the email. But I wonder, in retrospect, whether I should have done that. Right? I mean, the thing is that I do get a lot of emails with this kind of request. It does get a little bit heavy, right? No, I'm not going to spend my time trying to find this rather obscure article, right? And then I'd have to photocopy it because it's an old book, so it's not going to be available electronically. Right? So I'm not going to do it. Yeah? I mean, this is huge. When you make a request, what is crucial is the size of the imposition. The size of the imposition means what you're asking for. Are you asking for something that is really a lot, right? Or is it a fairly simple, straightforward request, right? So, I mean, it's about the difference between saying to someone, I'm very sorry I've left my cigarettes at home, would you mind giving me one of your cigarettes? That's not a big imposition, right? But, oh, I'm very sorry I've left my purse at home and I really need to pay an important bill for 50,000 yen. Could you lend it to me, right? Which is a much bigger imposition. Now, this is a huge imposition. I don't know this person. I've never communicated with him. So what you're really asking is how can you possibly make this request, which is a huge imposition? It's actually inappropriate, probably, to make this request at all. But if you're going to make it, you've got to work very, very hard and use language in very careful ways, yeah? You've probably got to say something like, I realize that what I'm asking is probably not something that you are able to do, and I will understand completely if you are not able to carry out my request, but I'm really lost, and you are the only person who I think perhaps might be able to help me, right? And then make the request, and then conclude again, but please, I will understand if you're not able to help. You've got to basically let the person off the hook, right? So that's what you'd have to do. You would agree? That's what you'd have to do.
So we keep on more or
One more question? Anybody?
Right at the back. It's time for a lady to ask a question. So far, we've only had men.
I think it is better for the students to work out the grammatical rules rather than teacher just tell them just transfer the knowledge to the students. But my problem is that my students are not patient enough. Sometimes they just want answers rather than thinking about the grammatical rules and stuff. So, is there any that kind of problems?
Well, it seems to me that I mean, I've spent tonight talking about two different aspects of language teaching, right? I've talked about task-based teaching. I've talked about grammar teaching through consciousness-raising tasks. I mean, my answer to you is that maybe what your students need is perhaps more task-based language teaching, and maybe less grammar teaching, right? I don't know. I mean, my experience is, you know, I mean, I've used these tasks with students in different parts of the world, and my experience is that they quite like doing them. They quite like having to work it out. It appeals to them because it's a puzzle. And, you know, people like puzzles, and they like working out the answers to puzzles. All right, I'm not saying that every time that you teach grammar, you do it through a consciousness raising task. Sometimes it might be better to just quickly tell the students, right? Although they'll probably forget, right? But still, but it seems to me that it's something that you could try with your students. Yeah. They want quick answers. They're not very patient. Yeah? Well, it sounds to me as if when you say quick answers, they want to know what is the grammatical rule, and they want you to tell them it straight away. That's what you're saying.
I think because I'm teaching at high school, so because of the entrance exam, they cannot enjoy the puzzles and stuff, I guess.
No. I mean, it depends where you are in high school, because, you know, you don't have important examinations in every year in high school. Yeah? And of course, you know, you're raising what is a common problem in Japan, which is the examination system. And it's very difficult to, I mean, I've always felt in Japan there is a bit of a mismatch between what the Ministry of Education now tells you to do, which is to focus on developing communicative language skills, and yet there's no change to the examinations that they have to do. And the Ministry of Education doesn't do anything really seriously about changing examinations, right? So you must help to develop their communicative skills. Meanwhile, the students must continue to take traditional examinations. It's changing, I know, but slowly. But still, that's true, right? So, you know, your situation means that there's a compromise. That some of the time you have to do what you know is important for them to pass the exam, right? At other times you have to do what you know is good for trying to develop their communicative skills.
Thank you very much for the exploratory discussion. With that, Professor George McGreen, President of SELT-Okinawa, will deliver a few words to conclude today's event.
Thank you very much, Hirashita Sensei. And Professor Rod Ellis, thank you so much. That was amazing. It was just absolutely fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, who's your favorite actor? Who's your favorite athlete? Who's your favorite musician? If you could name the number one in the world, who is it for you? The person you've just seen in the English language teaching world is number one. Number one, absolutely, without a doubt. And I've been a teacher for... I don't know. I can't think of an equal. Maybe you can tell me after.
Jack Richards.
Jack Richards. Yeah. No, I've never had the pleasure, so I couldn't say. But his stuff, I've read a lot of his stuff as well. And yeah, absolutely amazing. Amazing. And what you guys have seen here today, this is basically what he has spoken about in such a short time, okay? In our profession, a lot of the time you get a complicated explanation about something, and it's kind of hard to understand. Even for me, I'm listening, I'm like, I don't know what this guy's saying. Or I'm reading, and it's the same thing. And that's not what we've just seen here. What you've seen right here, and what you've heard about, is the equivalent of an entire master's degree, at the very least, in teaching English as a second language. And it's been explained to you in a very, very easy, uncomplicated manner, you know, and with action involved as well. Not just, okay, this is this, this is this, this is this. No, it's like, okay, why don't you try it out for yourself? And that's just so important. And, you know, I guess for me, the biggest thing is reflection on your teaching and, you know, taking research into your classroom. And that research is not about, you know, okay, complicated, let's write like something difficult. It's about just thinking about what you're doing and how to do it better. And we've been very, very privileged to have Rod Ellis come, and Professor Rod Ellis, and talk to us about this. And I'd like to thank him first and foremost, but also the people that made it possible, Hiratsuka Sensei, the people, the officers from SELT and JALT, and the community of the Center of Community Research Project, and the students who volunteered tonight. Thank you so, so much. And also everyone for coming and taking this time to elevate this profession. So with that in mind, I was wondering, since it's JALT, Professor Rod Ellis, whether or not you might be JALT, Okinawa JALT, UC, and AJALT, right?
I was told I had to put this on. And when you told me this, I was very worried that I would have to take my shirt off. And I told him that actually my body is not quite like Beckham. But I will, without taking my shirt off. He also said something very nice to me. He said that he feared that probably they'd got a size too large for me because they felt that probably with my age and all these books that I've written when I have to sit down all the time, I must be getting a big stomach. So let me see if I can put this on. It's a good fit.
Looking good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Rod Ellis. Oh my goodness.
Thank you, Professor Joseph Martin. Let's give Professor Rod Ellis a big round of applause one more time. Thank you very much for participating in this event. This has come to an end, and we can't say goodbye to Rod Ellis, but we might be around a little bit more. So if you would like to maybe have a chat for 5 minutes or so, you can. And after this, from 9:30, we will have a dinner party with Professor Rod Ellis, so we can make our way to Taikachi in Okinawa Kokusai University. And could you please make sure that you will hand in your questionnaire at the exit when you leave. Thank you very much, everyone.